Burnout. It's a word we hear often, usually tied to long hours at work, too many responsibilities, or emotional exhaustion from the chaos of everyday life. But what if burnout is more than just being tired? What if it's a deep, chronic depletion of the soul, of your energy, your identity, your sense of belonging? And what if you were already carrying more emotional weight than most people around you? For many in the LGBTQ community, burnout isn't just an occupational hazard. It's a silent epidemic. In today's video, we're diving into a topic that's rarely addressed, but desperately needs attention: why burnout hits the LGBTQ community harder, deeper, and often earlier. It's not just about long hours or poor work-life balance. It's about survival. It's about navigating a world where your very identity is questioned, politicized, or invalidated. It's about the pressure to advocate for your own rights while also educating others, standing tall against discrimination, and often performing emotional labor just to feel safe in spaces that were never made for you in the first place. Imagine living your life in a constant state of self-monitoring. Are you being too much? Too expressive? Too quiet? Are you safe in this bathroom, this classroom, this boardroom? Are your pronouns going to be respected? Will your partner be acknowledged or dismissed at a family gathering? This constant state of vigilance, this emotional hyper-awareness, adds layers of invisible labor to the everyday experiences that others take for granted. Add to this the expectations often placed on LGBTQ individuals in both professional and personal spheres. Many feel they must overperform to gain equal respect. Others are tokenized, celebrated for their diversity only when it serves someone else's agenda, not their own. The cumulative effect is a slow, relentless wearing down of energy, hope, and sometimes even self-worth. That's burnout, but it's burnout with a very specific flavor, shaped by social stigma, marginalization, and systemic barriers. We're going to explore the psychological, cultural, and institutional pressures that weigh heavily on LGBTQ lives. We'll look at how queer and trans individuals are more vulnerable to burnout, not because they are weaker or less resilient, but because they are constantly resisting, defending, and rebuilding themselves in systems that weren't designed to hold them. This isn't just about mental health, it's about justice. And it's about visibility. Because if we don't talk about queer burnout, we can't heal it. And if we can't heal it, we'll keep losing some of the most vibrant, creative, and powerful voices our world has to offer. So grab a drink, get comfortable, and let's have a real conversation. One that centers LGBTQ voices, honors the hidden struggles, and opens the door to a better way forward. Chronic minority stress, the silent weight of being different. In a world that often prizes conformity, those who exist outside the dominant norm experience stress not just from the usual pressures of life, but from the very act of existing authentically. This is the essence of chronic minority stress, a concept that captures the persistent, cumulative emotional and psychological burden carried by people who belong to marginalized groups, particularly the LGBTQ community. It is not a temporary discomfort, but a long-term, exhausting battle against societal bias, invisibility, and systemic inequality. Chronic minority stress is different from the common forms of stress most people encounter. While everyday stressors might arise from work, finances, or relationships, minority stress is rooted in one's social identity. For LGBTQ individuals, it begins early. Sometimes as children who learn to hide their feelings, suppress their mannerisms, or stay silent about who they are in fear of rejection. That silence becomes a survival tactic, but it also takes a toll. Imagine having to calculate every interaction, every word, and every outfit, not for style or comfort, but for safety and acceptance. This hypervigilance is not a choice, it's a necessity. And over time, it burns out even the strongest spirits. One of the most damaging aspects of chronic minority stress is the internalization of societal rejection. When someone repeatedly hears that their identity is wrong, sinful, or unnatural, those messages don't just bounce off, they embed themselves deeply. LGBTQ individuals may begin to question their own worth, hide parts of themselves, or believe they must overcompensate just to be accepted. This internal conflict between being true to oneself and being safe in society creates a powerful psychological strain that can lead to anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem. What makes this stress chronic is its unrelenting nature. It's not just a one-time incident of discrimination. It's daily microaggressions, like being misgendered, overlooked, or tokenized. It's the fear of coming out at work, the uncertainty of how doctors or teachers will respond, and the stress of navigating spaces that were not built with queer and trans people in mind. Even in supposedly progressive environments, subtle forms of exclusion persist. The cumulative effect is like carrying a weight that grows heavier each day, and yet, you're expected to keep moving, performing, and smiling through it all. Furthermore, chronic minority stress is not equally distributed. LGBTQ people of color, disabled LGBTQ individuals, and those living in conservative regions face intersectional layers of stress. They often deal with racism, ableism, or religious fundamentalism on top of queerphobia, compounding the impact on their mental and physical health. This intersectionality makes it even harder to access safe spaces and adequate care, deepening the cycle of exhaustion and isolation. Emotional labor and identity policing in LGBTQ lives. In today's society, emotional labor is often misunderstood as a workplace concept, something employees do to stay polite with difficult customers or maintain a cheerful attitude in service roles. But for LGBTQ individuals, emotional labor takes on a much deeper, more exhausting role. It becomes a way of surviving. And paired with identity policing, the act of monitoring, adjusting, or concealing one's authentic self to meet societal expectations, this emotional toll becomes a silent and relentless drain on mental health. Emotional labor for LGBTQ people isn't a 9-to-5 shift, it's a daily performance. Whether it's deciding how to dress, how to speak, or even whether it's safe to mention a partner's gender, queer and trans individuals constantly navigate environments that may not affirm or accept them. This ongoing calculation, will this person judge me? Is it safe to come out here? Will I be taken seriously if I use my pronouns? Is mentally exhausting. It's a form of invisible work that's rarely acknowledged but always expected. Identity policing makes it worse. LGBTQ individuals, especially those who are gender nonconforming, often face scrutiny not only from society at large, but even from within their own communities. People are told they're too flamboyant, not gay enough, too masculine for a woman, or not trans enough to be valid. These rigid standards force people to contort themselves into narrow definitions just to feel seen. This type of internalized scrutiny creates a never-ending loop of self-doubt and emotional overthinking. In professional settings, identity policing can lead LGBTQ individuals to mask key parts of themselves. A lesbian woman might avoid talking about her wife for fear of awkwardness or bias. A non-binary employee may be misgendered repeatedly, but feel too anxious to correct their coworkers, worried about being labeled difficult. This self-censorship isn't just tiring, it chips away at authenticity, belonging, and confidence over time. Even in social spaces that are supposedly inclusive, emotional labor persists. Queer people are often expected to educate others about LGBTQ issues, act as spokespeople for their identities, or suppress their hurt in the face of ignorance to keep the peace. This burden of constant explanation, paired with the fear of being stereotyped, misunderstood, or rejected, becomes a heavy emotional cost. What's often overlooked is that this labor is unpaid, unrecognized, and unrelenting. It leads to anxiety, isolation, burnout, and sometimes even self-erasure. When someone is constantly required to defend or explain their existence, they have little energy left to simply live. To change this reality, we need to stop expecting queer people to bear the emotional weight of making others comfortable. We must create environments where authenticity is welcomed, not punished. Lack of affirming support systems, the invisible weight on LGBTQ lives. Support isn't just about having people around, it's about feeling seen, heard, and safe within your relationships and communities. For many LGBTQ individuals, especially those navigating complex identities in unwelcoming environments,
The lack of affirming support systems becomes one of the most invisible yet deeply damaging sources of stress. It's not simply the absence of love, it's the absence of recognition. And over time, this absence creates a profound void that contributes to emotional burnout, isolation, and even mental health crises. An affirming support system means more than tolerance, it means active acceptance. It's about having friends, family members, workplaces, or even health professionals who don't just know that someone is LGBTQ, but embrace them for it. They listen without judgment. They use the correct pronouns. They offer space to be vulnerable without fear of rejection or ridicule. For people outside the LGBTQ community, this kind of support may be taken for granted. But for queer, trans, and non-binary individuals, it is often the exception rather than the rule. Many LGBTQ individuals grow up in families where discussions of identity are silenced or shamed. Some are outright rejected by their parents, forced to hide who they are, or subjected to conversion efforts. Even those with accepting families may face subtle invalidations, such as being asked not to talk about their partner or having their identity dismissed as a phase. These micro-rejections over time chip away at a person's sense of self-worth. When the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally fail to affirm your identity, it creates a painful contradiction that can lead to chronic self-doubt and emotional exhaustion. In school and workplace settings, the picture isn't much brighter. LGBTQ students often experience bullying, lack of representation in curricula, or silence from teachers and staff. In the workplace, LGBTQ professionals may face discrimination, lack of advancement, or hostile environments where they're forced to hide who they are to avoid losing opportunities or respect. Without a community that validates their experience, they're left to carry these burdens alone, shouldering stress that accumulates silently until it erupts in burnout, depression, or withdrawal. Healthcare is another realm where the lack of affirming support causes harm. Many LGBTQ individuals are reluctant to seek medical or mental health care because they've experienced providers who misgender them, make assumptions about their lives, or simply don't understand queer-specific concerns. This leads to delayed diagnoses, untreated trauma, and a continued sense of alienation within systems meant to heal. The truth is, affirming support systems are not a luxury, they're a necessity. They create the foundation for mental resilience, self-acceptance, and sustainable well-being. Activism fatigue, when fighting for change becomes exhausting. Activism is often seen as heroic, standing up for justice, demanding rights, pushing society forward. It's a force that has driven revolutions, reformed laws, and reshaped cultures. But behind the banners, hashtags, and public speeches, there's a hidden toll that many don't see: activism fatigue. It's a deep, emotional, and often physical exhaustion experienced by those who are consistently on the front lines of social justice movements. And for many activists, especially those from marginalized communities, this fatigue is not just common, it's inevitable. At its core, activism fatigue arises when the emotional weight of fighting for change becomes overwhelming. This isn't just ordinary tiredness from hard work. It's the exhaustion that sets in when you constantly advocate for basic human dignity, and yet the world seems slow or unwilling to change. It's the heaviness that builds after facing years of pushback, ignorance, or outright hostility. It's the ache that comes from holding space for others while still trying to heal yourself. For LGBTQ individuals, especially queer people of color, activism fatigue can be compounded by lived experiences of oppression. They are not only advocating for change, but also navigating daily realities of discrimination, rejection, or erasure. This dual burden, being both the subject of injustice and the fighter against it, makes the weight even heavier. And often, they are expected to stay calm, informative, and resilient, even when they are hurting. The expectation to be endlessly strong becomes another layer of pressure, silencing the very people who most need rest. The digital age adds its own twist to activism fatigue. Social media offers a powerful platform for awareness and mobilization, but it also bombards activists with constant images of injustice, violence, and crisis. The line between being informed and being overwhelmed blurs. Burnout becomes not just likely, but almost guaranteed when the mind has no time to disconnect, recharge, or simply exist without urgency. There's also the problem of invisibility. Activists often feel unappreciated, unsupported, or taken for granted. The emotional labor of organizing, educating, and holding communities together is rarely recognized or rewarded. And while allies may come and go, true change takes time, sometimes decades. This slow pace can create deep disillusionment, making activists question whether their efforts are worth it. Many begin to withdraw, not because they no longer care, but because they are depleted. To address activism fatigue, we must first normalize it. It is not a weakness. It is not failure. It is a human response to sustained emotional labor. Rest, boundaries, and healing must be built into our movements. Activists deserve support, not just applause. They need mental health resources, safe spaces to step back, and communities that remind them their worth is not tied to their output. Systemic inequities and workplace discrimination. Systemic inequities and workplace discrimination are not isolated incidents. They are embedded realities that impact countless individuals, especially those from marginalized communities. While the modern workplace often presents itself as progressive and inclusive, the lived experiences of many LGBTQ individuals, people of color, women, disabled individuals, and other minority groups tell a very different story. These inequities go far beyond individual prejudice. They are the result of deeply rooted institutional structures that perpetuate unfairness and limit access to opportunities. At its core, systemic inequity refers to the unequal distribution of resources, rights, and opportunities across social groups due to entrenched norms and policies. In the workplace, this might appear as wage gaps, limited promotions for minority employees, lack of representation in leadership roles, or biased hiring practices. It's not always loud or obvious. Often, it's hidden behind the illusion of meritocracy, where success is said to be based solely on talent and hard work. But for many, the playing field has never been level. Workplace discrimination, while a component of systemic inequity, is more visible in some cases. This includes behaviors like harassment, misgendering, exclusion from projects, or biased evaluations based on race, gender identity, or sexual orientation. LGBTQ employees, for example, often report feeling unsafe being out at work due to fear of backlash or lost opportunities. Trans and non-binary individuals, in particular, face high levels of unemployment and underemployment, despite having qualifications equal to or better than their peers. These experiences are not just emotionally draining, they affect mental health, job satisfaction, and overall well-being. When a person must constantly code switch, hide parts of their identity, or work twice as hard for the same recognition, it leads to burnout, disengagement, and in some cases, early exit from the workforce altogether. This is not a result of personal weakness, but a consequence of systems that reward conformity and penalize difference. Moreover, leadership and decision-making roles remain predominantly occupied by majority groups, often white, cisgender, heterosexual men. This lack of diversity at the top reinforces a cycle where policies and workplace cultures fail to reflect the needs of all employees. When inclusive voices are missing from the boardroom, it becomes easier to ignore the subtle yet harmful dynamics that prevent equitable treatment. Addressing systemic inequities requires more than just diversity training or inclusive slogans. It calls for a fundamental shift in how organizations operate. Rethinking hiring practices, implementing transparent promotion pathways, auditing wage structures, and creating environments where everyone feels safe, seen, and valued. Burnout doesn't ask for permission. It creeps in slowly, quietly, then all at once. But for LGBTQ folks, burnout is often baked into daily life, not as a flaw in the individual, but as a reflection of larger societal stressors. It's what happens when you're forced to hold your identity close in spaces that reject it, or when you're expected to constantly educate others while still trying to survive yourself. It's what happens when you juggle your own healing while supporting your community, advocating for rights, and navigating discrimination, all at the same time. We need to recognize that LGBTQ burnout isn't just personal, it's political, cultural, and systemic. It is the product of a world that too often refuses to affirm, uplift, or protect queer lives. And yet, even within this burnout, there is something profoundly powerful, the ability of LGBTQ people to endure, to create beauty through struggle, and to forge communities of love and resistance despite all odds. But resilience shouldn't have to mean suffering. That's why this conversation matters. If you're part of the LGBTQ community and you're feeling exhausted, overwhelmed, or just disconnected from yourself, know that you are not broken. You're not failing. You're human. And your burnout is a valid response to a world that has not yet learned how to love you fully and without condition. So, what can we do moving forward? We can start by giving ourselves and others permission to rest. Rest is radical. Rest is resistance. We can begin building spaces, both online and offline, where LGBTQ people don't just survive, but thrive. Where healing is prioritized and rest is respected. Where we don't measure worth by productivity, but by authenticity and connection. We can push for inclusive mental health care that recognizes queer-specific stressors. We can challenge work environments that exploit our emotional labor and demand performance over well-being. We can build coalitions, amplify each other's voices, and speak up even when it's uncomfortable. We can and must rewrite the narrative that expects LGBTQ people to be superheroes in every space without ever breaking down. Burnout thrives in silence. So let's talk about it. Let's normalize taking a step back, saying no, turning off the noise, and prioritizing joy. Joy, after all, is the greatest rebellion. Thank you for watching and for being part of this necessary conversation. If this video resonated with you, please consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear these words. Let's keep showing up for each other, not just in struggle, but in healing. Take care of yourself. Take care of your community. And remember, you are allowed to rest. You are allowed to reclaim your peace. You are allowed to put yourself first. Until next time, stay kind, stay fierce, and stay whole.